is claiming that political violence is never the answer coming from a perspective of privilege. From a philosophy of ethics perspective, the statement, political violence is never necessary, is highly likely to be a perspective of privilege, but it is not necessarily so. It can also stem from a deeply held, consistent ethical framework, like absolute pacifism. Let's break this down by examining the major ethical traditions and the concept of privilege. 1. The privilege perspective. The charge of privilege here is powerful because it suggests the speaker is insulated from the conditions that would make political violence seem like a last resort. This aligns with several ethical critiques. Consequentialism, utilitarianism. A consequentialist argues that the morality of an action is determined by its outcomes. From this view, declaring all political violence unjustified ignores historical and potential scenarios where it might lead to the greatest good for the greatest number. Example: could the abolition of chattel slavery in the United States have been achieved without the violence of the Civil War? A consequentialist might argue that the immense moral good of ending slavery outweigh the horrific costs of the war. A person privileged by not being enslaved might find it easier to dismiss this violent necessity. Privilege insight. The privileged person does not bear the immense, ongoing suffering that would be prolonged by an action. Their calculus of least harm is abstract, while for the oppressed, the continuous harm of the status quo is a concrete and unbearable reality. Contractarianism, e.g., John Rawls. This theory asks what rules people would agree to from a veil of ignorance, not knowing their place in society. While Rawlsian theory prioritizes civil disobedience, it leaves the door open for justified resistance against serious violations of justice. Privilege. Insight. A person enjoying the benefits of a just or tolerable society, the contract, has a vested interest in maintaining order and condemning violence that breaks the contract. Someone for whom the social contract has already been broken by an oppressive state, e.g., through systemic violence, denial of basic rights, genocide, does not have the same obligation to obey its nonviolence rules. To tell them violence is never necessary is to demand they uphold a contract that does not protect them. Critical theory, e.g., Marxism, feminism, post-colonialism. These philosophies are explicitly focused on power structures and privilege. They argue that the state itself holds a monopoly on legitimate violence: police, military, courts. Privilege insight. The statement, political violence is never necessary, implicitly recognizes only state violence as legitimate. It condemns the violence of the rebel while accepting the violence of the ruler. The privileged person is often the beneficiary of state violence, which protects their property and status, and is therefore blind to its oppressive function. For the oppressed, state violence is a constant threat. From this perspective, rejecting all counter-violence is to side with the powerful and demand that the oppressed remain passive in the face of their own subjugation. Think of Frantz Fanon's justification of anti-colonial violence as a psychologically necessary and liberatory act for the colonized. 2. The non-privileged perspective. Absolute pacifism. It is important to acknowledge that the statement can also originate from a rigorous, non-privileged ethical stance. Deontology, Kantianism. A deontologist believes certain actions are inherently right or wrong regardless of their consequences. An absolute pacifist holds that violence against persons is a fundamental violation of moral duty and human dignity. Key distinction. This is not a claim about necessity from a strategic perspective, but about permissibility from a moral one. The pacifist may acknowledge that violence might seem necessary to achieve a goal, e.g., liberation, but would argue it is still morally forbidden. They would advocate for other, non-violent forms of resistance, even if they are harder, longer, and riskier. Figures. Think of Leo Tolstoy, Mahatma Gandhi, or Martin Luther King Jr. Their pacifism was not born of privilege. It was a deeply held spiritual and ethical conviction forged in the heart of struggle. They argued that violent means corrupt righteous ends and that true justice can only be built through nonviolent action. However, Even here, a critic might argue that the success of figures like Gandhi and King relied on specific political contexts, and that their philosophy might not be a viable option in the face of an utterly implacable enemy like Nazi Germany. So what does this all mean? The statement, "Political violence is never necessary," is far more likely to be a perspective of privilege than a rigorous ethical stance. It generally ignores the consequentialist reality that some historical injustices appear to have required violent overthrow. It often ignores the asymmetry of violence, where state violence is deemed legitimate and the violence of the oppressed is universally condemned. It can be a tool of maintaining the status quo from which the privileged benefit. However, to be philosophically precise, one must allow for the possibility that the statement springs from a consistent, absolute pacifism. The crucial difference is that the pacifist offers a difficult, alternative path of resistance, while the privileged perspective often uses the rejection of violence as a reason for passivity. Therefore, when hearing this statement, the key ethical question to ask is, what is your alternative pathway to justice that does not involve violence, and are you actively working to make that alternative viable? The answer to that question will usually reveal whether the sentiment is one of privilege or principle.